This tale comes from the scorching heat of Mauritania, a place where the Sahara meets the Atlantic and where the most ancient forms of magic are practiced, away from the eyes of the modern world. It involves a strange viral incident in 2023 surrounding a TikTok travel influencer, an ancient artifact, and a curse known only as the Hex of the Sands. Liam Sterling was the perfect modern explorer, confident, reckless, and obsessed with content. He specialized in finding abandoned locations with a spiritual twist. His most anticipated trip was into the deep Mauritanian desert to find the rumored ruins of Tegdausit, a forgotten medieval city. What he actually found was far, far older and far more malevolent. He met a local guide in the city of Attar, a nervous man named Omar, who immediately warned Liam against deviating from the prescribed path. Liam naturally offered Omar triple the fee to take him to a location Omar only referred to as the Well of Silent Stones, a place of profound ill omen. Omar finally agreed, but only on the condition that Liam never film within sight of the well. Deep in the remote desert, they found it. Not a well, but a naturally formed shallow circular depression surrounded by stones that Omar claimed were not rocks, but petrified men. In the center of the depression lay the object that would change and end Liam's life, a smooth, perfectly circular black mirror the size of a dinner plate. It was not glass, but polished obsidian, covered in strange, non-Arabic geometric carvings. Liam immediately started filming, ignoring Omar's frantic, terrified whispers. He held the mirror up, the desert sun reflecting off its dark surface. Omar collapsed, covering his face, screaming about the Sand Diviner, a mythical entity said to be trapped within the well, who could only be summoned by light hitting the obsidian mirror. Liam felt nothing, saw nothing, and packed the mirror into his bag, convinced he had found the perfect piece of exotic content. Over the next few weeks, Liam's life, as documented on social media, began to unravel in real time. First, the mirror started appearing in his background shots, always facing the camera, even when he swore he had stored it away. Then, his fans started commenting on his appearance, a deep, permanent exhaustion, rapid weight loss, and most chillingly, his eyes. They seemed to be reflecting not his own image, but a shifting, grainy pattern of black sand. The terrifying climax occurred during a live stream. Liam was talking about the strange headaches he was having when his voice began to change. It became deeper, coarser, and spoke with an accent that was neither English nor Arabic, a language that sounded like sand grinding against rock. The reflection in his pupils was now undeniable. It was a swirl of black grains, constantly moving. As thousands watched, Liam clopped the camera and the feed cut to a view of the obsidian mirror, now resting on his desk. The reflection in the mirror was not Liam. It was a skeletal, desiccated figure with eyes like twin vortexes of black dust, a figure that seemed to be pulling its form out of the mirror's surface. A final guttural scream was heard before the feed died. Police who later entered Liam's apartment found everything undisturbed, except for one thing. Liam Sterling was gone. His passport, wallet, and phone were all on the desk next to the obsidian mirror. The only evidence of struggle was a thin layer of fine black sand covering the floor, traced by the distinct impression of a human hand dragging across the surface. The mirror itself was cold to the touch and devoid of all reflection. The consensus among the occult community online is that the Sand Diviner was not trapped in the well, but was an entity tied to the mirror. Liam, by reflecting the sun off the obsidian, had performed the final necessary ritual to exchange places. The diviner escaped,
taking Liam's body as a temporary vessel, and Liam's soul became the new, terrified reflection trapped within the hex of the sands. This terrifying lesson remains. Some artifacts aren't meant to be discovered. They're meant to be left alone, buried deep beneath the Earth's silence. This terrifying sequence was witnessed live by thousands of followers on social media, and though the platform quickly removed the footage, transcripts and mirrored clips circulate in the deepest corners of the web, swearing the sand diviner is now loose among us. Now, let's move to the next story, which was sent to us by a listener who discovered a terrifying hidden ritual practiced by a seemingly harmless religious sect in Nigeria.
This chilling tale of deep-seated occult terror takes us to Nigeria, where the convergence of modern life and traditional, dark spiritual practice is perhaps the most volatile. This is the story of the Goat of the Crossroads, a widely shared Nigerian urban legend that turned horribly, lethally real for a group of unsuspecting students in Lagos. The legend involves a specific type of money ritual known locally as Aje-Kpako, a blood sacrifice performed at a rural three-way junction, Crossroads, at the peak of the darkest hour, usually 3 a.m. The key component is the use of a sacrificial animal that is somehow infused with the victim's identity. The most recent and terrifying manifestation of this practice centered around a specific trending online community dedicated to documenting creepy roadside encounters. In 2021, 4 university students, Tunde, Amara, Kemi, and Obi, decided to film a documentary attempting to debunk the Aje-Kpako legend. They drove out late one night to a notoriously isolated crossroads on the outskirts of Ibadan, setting up high-definition cameras in the dense bush. Tunde, the most skeptical, insisted they were wasting their time. At precisely 2:45 a.m., they saw a car approach. It was a new, black luxury sedan, driven by a man dressed in expensive traditional clothes. He was alone. The car stopped in the middle of the junction, and the man stepped out, calmly carrying a large white goat with distinctive markings, a streak of red dye across its forehead, and small, expensive gold trinkets woven into its horns. The man began chanting, a low, guttural sound that seemed to pull the very air out of the night. He was not speaking Yoruba or Igbo, but a language the students' audio equipment identified as an ancient, pre-colonial dialect. Then the man pulled a glistening, curved ritual knife. The students, frozen in the bush, were about to witness a human sacrifice, only with a goat as the apparent victim. But as the knife descended, Kemi, who was holding a high-powered camera flash, panicked. She accidentally triggered the flash, illuminating the scene like a lightning strike. The man froze, and the goat, which had been silent, let out a sound that was not a bleat, but a high-pitched, agonizing human scream. In that split second of intense light, the students saw the goat's eyes. They weren't goat eyes. They were wide, human, and filled with a terror that transcended understanding. The man at the junction looked up, directly at the patch of bush where the students were hidden. His face was distorted with rage and a look of profound, terrifying inconvenience. He didn't pursue them. He didn't have to.
The moment the flash went off, the ritual was ruined, the energy redirected, and the curse was transferred to the people who interrupted it. The man calmly slit the goat's throat, let the blood soak the junction, and drove away in the black sedan, leaving the carcass behind. The students fled, convinced they had narrowly escaped, but the curse had begun. The next day, Tunde, the skeptic, complained of intense itching. Within 48 hours, his skin started hardening, thickening, becoming incredibly leathery. Doctors were baffled, diagnosing him with a rare aggressive form of scleroderma, but the symptoms accelerated. Tunde began to lose his ability to speak, his vocal cords constricting, until all he could produce was a rough, painful bleating sound. Amara, the documentarian, was next. She began to suffer from a compulsive, debilitating urge to eat grass, paper, and anything that wasn't proper food. Kemi began to grow strange, hardened calluses on her forehead, and Obi developed a profound, unshakable fear of all reflections, always avoiding mirrors and glass. The terrifying truth they eventually researched was that the goat of the Crossroads ritual was not to sacrifice an animal, but to transfer the curse of poverty, bad luck, or illness from a powerful person, the man in the sedan, to a randomly chosen living human host, whose identity was then transferred into the goat for the physical sacrifice. The flash of light had redirected the curse not to one host, but to all four of them, each receiving a fragment of the ultimate price. Tunde eventually died, suffocating from his constricted throat, bleating like an animal until the very end. The remaining 3 students never spoke of the incident again, their lives permanently marred by the curse. They had set out to debunk a legend, only to become a horrifying, viral example of its absolute, lethal reality. This horrifying event was pieced together by Watchman Tales from anonymous reports in a Nigerian student forum, corroborated by the strange, medically inexplicable death certificate of Tunde, a clear and terrifying reminder that some of the deepest secrets of African ritual are not myths, but potent, deadly sciences. Now let's move to the next story, which was sent to us by a man who uncovered a horrifying secret about his family's ancient tribal mask.
This story takes us into the deep, lush forests of the Ivory Coast, a region renowned for its powerful, often frightening traditional priesthoods and the dark practice of Gris-Gris, a form of potent, protective, and offensive magic. This particular tale focuses on a cursed object that recently resurfaced in the European art world, causing chaos that spread across continents. The Mask of the Silent Hunter. Dr. Elias Moreau was a brilliant, highly successful Ivorian French art historian living in Paris. He was not superstitious, focusing only on verifiable provenance and dating. In 2022, he received a request to authenticate a massive wooden mask recently acquired by a wealthy private collector. The mask was stunning. Carved from a single piece of dark wood, inlaid with polished ivory teeth and cowrie shells, with wide, empty eye sockets that seemed to drink the light. The mask had no official record, but its style was immediately recognizable to Elias as belonging to a specific, deeply secretive sect of his ancestral tribe, the Bolu. It was a Klek-Plek mask, usually used in fertility rites, but this one was horribly, uniquely warped.
When Elias touched it, he felt a sharp, static-like pain shoot up his arm. He ran a carbon dating test, expecting centuries-old results. The results were impossible. The wood was indeed old, but the cowrie shells were dated to the mid-1990s, and the ivory was definitively traced to a shipment smuggled out of the region in 2017. This mask was not an ancient relic. It was a recent, deliberate forgery, or, far worse, a mask created specifically for a modern, dark purpose. Elias traveled to the Ivory Coast, drawn by a historian's curiosity that quickly turned into a personal, terrifying obsession. He consulted his elder relatives and village priests, all of whom refused to even look at the photo of the mask. One old man, a highly respected Gris-Gris practitioner, finally whispered a name: Quadio. Quadio was not a traditional priest. He was a notorious figure in the 1990s, known as the Alchemist, a master of dark magic who specialized in creating objects designed to siphon a specific energy: youth. His ritual masks were infamous. They were not worn, but served as a permanent anchor for a terrible, self-sustaining curse. The secret was in the materials. The mask needed specific elements, each charged with vital energy: ancient wood, the link to the ancestors; modern ivory, stolen animal vitality; and fresh cowrie shells, currency representing wealth and life energy. But the horrifying core of the mask was its final ingredient. The mask was designed to silently hunt a victim, and the ivory teeth were not elephant tusks. They were human teeth, freshly extracted from a living person to transfer their vital life force. As Elias researched, the mask's current owner back in Paris began to suffer. The collector, a vibrant man in his early 50s, began to age drastically. His skin became papery, his hair turned white, and his doctors were stunned to find his internal organs were failing at a rate consistent with someone over 90 years old. He was a perfect, rapidly accelerating victim of energy siphoning. Elias finally understood the full horror. The mask wasn't a container. It was a remote feeding device, allowing the alchemist, wherever he was, to draw youth and life force from anyone in physical proximity to the artifact. And since Elias had been the first to touch it, the curse was now slowly following him. He returned to Paris to warn the collector and destroy the mask, but it was too late. The collector was hospitalized, a desiccated husk. The mask was gone. It had been moved to a high-security auction house, its provenance now verified by a shadowy competing historian. Elias Moreau knew the truth. The mask wasn't being sold as art, but as a silent, lethal weapon. The terror wasn't the mask itself, but the knowledge that an ultimate ancient evil like the Alchemist was still alive, still practicing his dark science, and now using the global art market as his personal, undetectable distribution network. The mask is now in a new, undisclosed private collection, silently consuming the life of its new owner, waiting for the alchemist's next command. This horrifying international case of occult crime was submitted to Watchman Tales by a colleague of Dr. Moreau, who believes the mask and the curse are still active, moving through the world's wealthiest circles and silently killing its victims. Now, let's move to the next story, which was sent to us by a man who survived a terrifying encounter with a creature that hunted him based on his scent.
The Kalahari Desert, stretching across Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, is not a barren wasteland. It is a landscape of ancient, brutal, and specialized survival. Its inhabitants, like the San people, possess knowledge of the land that defies modern science. But this story is about something that defies nature itself, a creature that hunts not by sight or sound, but by the very scent of human fear. Our tale begins in 2020 with a team of researchers from the University of Cape Town. Their mission, led by Professor Ilara Voss, was ecological, tracking the movements of elusive desert carnivores using modern infrared cameras and scent traps. They set up their base camp deep in a remote, protected section of the central Kalahari, a place so isolated the stars felt close enough to touch. The trouble started subtly. The team noticed their professional scent lures, powerful chemical compounds designed to attract lions and hyenas, were being repeatedly disabled, not eaten or destroyed, but carefully dismantled and pushed away from the traps, as if by something precise and intelligent. This was unusual behavior for any known predator. Then came the silence. The natural, constant hum of the desert, the chirping insects, the distant calls of jackals would suddenly cut out completely, leaving an immense, suffocating void that lasted for minutes. Professor Voss, a scientist to her core, initially blamed temperature inversion or atmospheric phenomena. The real terror began when the team started experiencing vivid the Kalahari Desert, stretching across Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, is not a barren wasteland. It is a landscape of ancient, brutal, and specialized survival. Its inhabitants, like the San people, possess knowledge of the land that defies modern science. But this story is about something that defies nature itself, a creature that hunts not by sight or sound, but by the very scent of human fear. Our tale begins in 2020 with a team of researchers from the University of Cape Town. Their mission, led by Professor Ilara Voss, was ecological, tracking the movements of elusive desert carnivores using modern infrared cameras and scent traps. They set up their base camp deep in a remote, protected section of the central Kalahari, a place so isolated the stars felt close enough to touch. The trouble started subtly. The team noticed their professional scent lures, powerful chemical compounds designed to attract lions and hyenas, were being repeatedly disabled, not eaten or destroyed, but carefully dismantled and pushed away from the traps as if by something precise and intelligent. This was unusual behavior for any known predator. Then came the silence. The natural, constant hum of the desert, the chirping insects, the distant calls of jackals would suddenly cut out completely, leaving an immense, suffocating void that lasted for minutes. Professor Voss, a scientist to her core, initially blamed temperature inversion or atmospheric phenomena. The real terror began when the team started experiencing vivid, shared night terrors. They all dreamed of a dark, long-limbed figure stalking the perimeter of the camp, but the detail that unified the dreams was the smell, a powerful, overpowering odor of rotting copper and scorched bone. They knew, even in sleep, that this creature was close. One night, a camera trap was triggered, not by a cat, but by a human, their newest team member, a young botanist named Ben. The footage, recovered the next morning, was chilling. Ben was not walking, he was running in absolute panic, naked, screaming a single repeated word,
Smell. The footage showed he ran directly away from the protective electric fence and deep into the trackless scrub. The search team found Ben 2 days later. He wasn't dead from dehydration or exposure. He was found huddled under a small acacia, utterly catatonic, his body covered, not in wombs, but in a thin, greasy film of dust and oil. The most horrifying detail was his skin. It was pale white, not sunburned, and his scent glands, his armpits, the back of his neck, his hands, had been violently abraded raw, as if he had frantically tried to scrape his own scent off his body. The sand trackers they brought in refused to go near the location. Through hesitant whispers, they named the entity the Matlawa, the scent hunter. It was an ancient predatory entity, older than the tribes themselves, rumored to be a creature that had perfected its survival by evolving to hunt the most powerful, subtle thing humanity possessed, its unique hormonal signature, the smell of fear. Professor Voss realized the creature wasn't attacking the scent lures because the chemical scents were too loud, too artificial. The Matlawa was drawn to the biological signatures, the subtle chemical trails left by anxiety, stress, and rising terror. When the silence fell, it wasn't the sound stopping, it was the Matlawa arriving, filtering the environment for its true meal. Then, the newest and most anxious member had been the easiest to track. The creature had pursued him, driving his fear to a frenzy, and then consumed his entire olfactory profile, leaving him a scentless, vacant shell. To prove her terrible theory, Voss prepared a final test. She evacuated the team, then set up a specialized sealed chamber in the middle of the camp containing an array of highly sensitive biomonitors designed to track stress hormones in the air. As a final, desperate measure, she placed a used, sweat-soaked piece of clothing from Ben inside the chamber. She monitored the camp remotely from a distance of 50 kilometers. At 3 a.m., the familiar silence fell. Moments later, the biomonitors went off the charts, registering a sudden, massive spike in an unknown compound, a heavy, metallic, coppery scent that rapidly overwhelmed the sample. The final reading, seconds before the feed died, showed a pressure fluctuation inside the chamber, consistent with a large, heavy object being sucked clean of air. When the recovery team reached the site, the chamber was untouched, perfectly sealed. But the clothes inside were gone, and the floor of the chamber was coated in that same thin, oily dust. The only thing left of Ben's scent and the Matlawa's passing was a palpable metallic stink on the inside of the glass. Professor Voss retired immediately and now lives in isolation, refusing to use any scented products, haunted by the knowledge that some predators are so advanced they don't even need eyes to find you. They only need the raw, beautiful chemistry of your fear. This story was shared with Watchman Tales by a former field assistant on Professor Voss's team, who remains profoundly traumatized by the fear of his own body chemistry, constantly scrubbing himself, terrified he is leaving a trail for the scent hunter. Now, let's move to the next story, which was sent to us by a man who survived a terrifying incident aboard an abandoned military transport in Central Africa. The vast, deep rainforests of the Democratic Republic of Congo hide more than just wildlife. They conceal the rusting, broken infrastructure of decades of conflict and forgotten colonialism. Nowhere is this decay more pronounced than along the infamous Congo Ocean Railway, a stretch of track that cuts through hundreds of miles of impassable jungle, connecting the interior to the coast. This is a story of a silent train, a spectral conductor, and a journey into a past that refuses to stay dead. In 2018, a documentary film crew led by a cynical but dedicated British journalist named Alastair Finch secured permission to film a piece on the remnants of the DRC's vast abandoned railway network. Their target was a legendary section of the line near the town of Kindu, where local lore claimed the tracks were haunted by the ghosts of forced laborers. Alastair's team located an immense military transport train, a behemoth of rust-colored steel, consisting of a locomotive and 7 heavily armored flatbed cars. It was completely untouched since the 1990s, sitting silent on a decaying siding. The locomotive's power core was long dead, drained of oil and fuel. Alastair decided the train itself was the perfect set piece. Their technician, a local engineer named Didier, was immediately uneasy. He pointed to a small, hand-painted sign nailed to the caboose door, written in a local dialect. The conductor demands his ticket. Didier explained that this particular train, during the height of the civil wars, was rumored to be commanded by a ruthless, high-ranking officer who executed anyone who wasn't authorized to ride. Ignoring the warning, Alastair and his camera operator, Chloe, spent a day rigging the interior of one of the cargo carriages with high-powered lights and cameras. That night, the horror began. Alastair was reviewing footage when a massive metallic shudder ran through the entire length of the dead train. It wasn't seismic, it was the shudder of the locomotive engaging its engine. Alastair and Chloe rushed outside. The lights were out in the camp, and the only illumination came from the locomotive's massive single headlight, which had inexplicably burst to life, casting a sickly yellow beam down the overgrown track. The terrifying sound that followed was the rhythmic, heavy hiss of a massive coal-fed engine, accompanied by the screech of steel wheels on rusted rails. The dead military train began to move, slowly at first, then gaining speed, pulling itself into the dense black abyss of the jungle night. Alastair, driven by a mixture of terror and journalistic mania, raced into the carriage with Chloe. They were on the ghost train, and it was taking them somewhere. Inside the carriage, the air was freezing and thick with the smell of old oil and something else, petrified dread. As the train hurtled deeper into the wilderness, they saw figures. Not ghosts, but shadows. Tall, gaunt shapes that seemed to be etched onto the walls of the carriage, moving and wavering with the train's rhythm. As the light hit them, the shadows momentarily resolved into the faces of men wearing the clothes of various militias, soldiers, and desperate refugees, their faces locked in silent screams. They were the victims, the uninvited, ticketless passengers who had met their end on this very carriage decades ago. Then they saw the conductor. He materialized in the carriage doorway, not a shadow, but a figure of profound, overwhelming absence. He was dressed in a pristine white military uniform from a forgotten regime, but his face was a blur, a featureless distortion of human form, and his hands were impossibly long and pale. He didn't speak. Instead, a voice, a deep, booming metallic sound filled their minds. Tickets, identity, authorization. Chloe, overwhelmed, collapsed, weeping uncontrollably. Alistair, scrambling, reached for his press credentials, holding them up to the faceless conductor. The figure hesitated, its gaze lingering on the photo and the official stamp. The voice boomed again in Alistair's skull. Authorized, documented, not ours. The moment the conductor stepped back, the train's speed dropped instantly. The metal shrieked against the tracks, and the locomotive's headlight abruptly died. The train ground to a halt and fell silent right back on the siding where it had started. Alistair and Chloe stumbled out of the train and collapsed onto the tracks. The air was warm again, smelling of damp earth. The conductor was gone, and the heavy military transport was once again a dead monument to rust. Didier found them hours later, barely coherent. Alistair Finch never finished the documentary. He realized that the ghost of the Congo rails wasn't the dead train itself, but the conductor's duty, a spectral manifestation of the ruthless bureaucracy of war, forever doomed to check the credentials of the dead. The ghosts he saw were the undocumented, unauthorized victims who never made it to the next stop. His press pass, a symbol of documented identity, had saved him from joining their eternal, ticketless ride. Which of these tales of dark magic and hidden fears gripped you the hardest tonight? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, the deepest curses are the ones you never see coming. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Watchman Tales, or the shadows just might decide to share their secrets with you. Sleep well, if you can.
You've seen their stories, but the darkness has only